much for joining us today. As you heard, one of the objectives of this presentation is to see national implementation plans on how to establish inventories of PFOS and related chemicals. But also, I'd like to start highlighting that reporting obligation under Stockholm, which is Article 15, is due 31st of August this year. You might know that reporting under Stockholm happens every 4 years. We are now in that deadline year, and all inventories that you have, not only inventories of PFOS, but also of other chemicals, might help and support you completing the reporting obligation you have. So please bear in mind while I'm speaking today that all this information is not only for the National Implementation Plan development or action plan orientation, but also for the reporting obligation. You also might see in the title of the presentation that we are going to talk about PFOS and related chemicals. And this is mainly because PFOS was listed in a very interesting way by the Conference of the Parties in 2009. It was listed as the perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, the PFOS itself, but also its salts. And in Annex B, you can see, if you have it in front of you or afterwards if you wish, a list of examples of the salts. And this is a list of examples. So it means that others related salts to PFOS are also included. And of course, the PFOS-F, the perfluorooctane sulfonyl fluoride, which has also been named, identified with the CAS number. So what is PFOS? PFOS is a fully fluorinated ionic substance, which has been commonly used as a salt and incorporated into large polymers. The PFOS-F is an intermediate for the synthesis of PFOS. So when you are dealing with PFOS-F, you are in a way dealing with PFOS. This one has been listed to therefore restrict all PFOS-related substances. You have a picture of the molecule and the formula there in the slide. So what is PFOS? I will not explain a lot about PFOS because it's very large and that will take all over the presentation, but in general, PFOS is very persistent and it has the capacity to undergo long-range transport. That is why it has been listed. It's also toxic and it bioaccumulates. PFOS and the derivatives or the related chemicals are very, very good surface active compounds with very extremely low surface tensions. So they are very good water and dust repellents. So inventories. Why do we have to do inventories? As you know, inventories are not mandatory under Stockholm, but they are the path or the road to really understand and take a picture of your national situation. In particular, if you want to develop action plans or if you need to report. Inventories are also a very good source of information to see trends and to see how good or how bad you have been meeting the requirements of the Stockholm Convention. As you know, the Stockholm Convention is a very comprehensive one, and it deals not only with the life cycle of the chemicals, but it also tries to make the world understand how the phase-out is being done through the effectiveness evaluation of the convention. But going into the inventory itself, as I said before, it helps to identify if the requirements of the Stockholm Convention are being met by the country. If you need to develop a strategy that you need to because of the national implementation plans, you have to also prioritize. So inventories can give you an idea of which are the sectors of importance in your country, which are the gaps that you have or that you might have. And as we said before, the inventory are very good basis for providing information towards the reporting obligation under Stockholm Convention. But also, in the case of PFOS, there are critical uses of PFOS that are listed as acceptable purposes and specific exemptions. Today, we will not go in depth into them, but we will present a slide afterwards indicating a little where you can find them or where you have to look, depending on your country. Information gaps are also very important, in particular to have action plans that are really effective in your country. The first step of the NIPS, the second phase actually, which is the inventory taking, sometimes you don't get enough information, but the gaps in information can help you identify for the need of further support, either financial or technical support. So inventory provides information, but also provide gaps in that information, which can really serve as the basis for the future, for the near future, in the short-term strategies that you are introducing in your action plans. The guidance, for the purpose of the NIP, the Secretariat, together with UNIDO, UNITAR, developed a guidance for making inventories on PFOS and also on the other new chemicals, PBDEs as well. The structure of this guidance is very similar to the structure of the guidance of the PBDEs. So you'll have different chapters. The first chapter relates to the objectives of the inventory, the purposes of the guidance, the key features, and how to use it. This chapter 2 relates a little more on the background information and provides in-depth information related to articles, for example, that might contain PFOS and related substances, the levels of concentrations that PFOS might be present. And this section also contains a list of industries that are producing or produced this chemical or used it. Section 3 or chapter 3 relates to the general inventory steps, and you'll see that this is a stepwise approach with 5 steps. I will explain that in the next slide. And in this regard, this is also a general methodology, the stepwise methodology for inventory taking. The different guidance have exactly the same structure as I was mentioning before, but the collection and compiling of data is where you will find the main differences. If you see from chapters 4 to 7, you have the different sectors. The industry sector, for example, in chapter 4, where production, recycling, and the use of these chemicals are being presented. Then in chapter 5, the consumer market, and in chapter 6, you will find the information of what we call the professional users, and that relates, for example, to firefighting foams, to aviation hydraulic fluids, to pesticides. All of these also have a specific chapter related to waste, stockpiles, and contaminated sites, and finally the inventory report. In relation to the inventory report, we will also make some comments in this presentation afterwards. So the steps I was mentioning before. This is a 5-step methodology where the first one relates to the planning, and there are different milestones in that one. You need an inventory team, or you need a consultant, or you need somebody, the focal point maybe, to really undertake this inventory itself. That depends on your country and your national situation and the resources you have. You also need to really identify the key stakeholders. This is mainly for PFOS and PBDEs, very essential because the stakeholders are related to the different sectors that you have, which are quite a little. Then what we believe it's the most important part is the definition of the scope. The scope will depend on many different things, in particular to the resources that you might have allocated, but also when you start compiling information and looking at your data and managing the data, you might understand that you need to go back and see and refine your scope. Maybe that's not the case, but the scope is something very important to have very clear because it will give you different results afterwards. The step 2 relates to the choosing of the data methodologies, how to compile, how to get your information, and that is what we call the tiered approach. The tiered approach is an initial gathering exercise that can be followed by a more in-depth evaluation to generate data and identify missing and incomplete data. The tiered approach I will explain with more details in the next one. Step 3, if you see the titles of the bubbles there are the same titles of the different chapters that I explained before. So you have the industry sector, the consumer market, those other that are considered the professional users, and the waste, stockpiles, and contaminated sites part. Step 4, as usual, you don't only take a picture, but you just manage and evaluate the data you get. If that information is not enough, is too much, you go back and redefine your scope, maybe. This is not to repeat the whole exercise and redo your inventory. It's just to really understand where you are in and how useful the information you have. And the last step is the report, how to prepare the inventory report. And there you'll get some very general ideas of what type of information to gather and to have in the report. Those things are considered to be at least what you need to have, but of course the reports depends on you. This is just a guidance and orientation document for you to not to miss things. So the step 2, the tiered approach. This is a graphic of the resources you might need to use and the complexity of the inventory you are getting, so that your outputs and results are very clear for you. This is a 3-tiered approach, a 3-tiered methodology that includes from an initial assessment and goes into an in-depth inventory. If you are in the tier 1, which is this initial assessment, you'll only need to have a desk study, maybe consultations, statistics coming from different stakeholders that can be, for example, customs. But then what is the output or the result that you will get? It's just an overview. That might be enough information if you are dealing with a sector that you don't have. For example, photo imaging. Photo imaging is not being done everywhere. So with a desk study, you might say, okay, we don't have this. I don't need to really take care about this exemption. So I will go in depth into other things. The tier 2 is the middle one, where preliminary inventory can be addressed, and the tier 3 goes into an in-depth inventory where you might need to do some sampling, some analysis, maybe visit the different places. In this one, some quantifications or screening might be undertaken, and it might be done for certain sector. So what is the result? The result is that your inventory might be in tier 1 for impregnated leather, for example, but it might be in tier 3 for firefighting foams. It depends on your national situation, but also depends in the risks you might have. Some of the exemptions or the acceptable purposes that PFOS was listed with are what we call open applications of PFOS, so there the risk is a little more important. In this regard, where to start or how to do the inventory might also be something to discuss internally with your different stakeholders, and depending on the national resources you have, in the job resources you have, and also in the time frame. Sometimes going in depth does not really add any value, so you also need to consider that situation. Step 3 relates to the collection and compilation of data from the different sectors, and in here the guidance provides questionnaires and surveys so that you really can use the forms that are in the different annexes of this guidance document as a basis for asking questions to your industrial sector, for example. What happens with the consumer markets? More in-depth analysis might be needed or not. You also have questionnaires there, and you might need to verify the presence of the PFOS in the articles by analysis or by just understanding how PFOS was previously used. So at this moment, PFOS is being substituted in many different processes. You might not no longer have them. For professional use areas, an initial assessment stage can be used, for example, and there are also questionnaires and surveys. In the case of waste management and contaminated sites, the focus should be on the remainings, on the stockpiles you have, and to see a little if you have a very huge waste streams and waste segments or not. In the case of contaminated sites, it's also an issue of identifying where are the most relevant things to look at. Again, in this step 3, the inventory needs to investigate if your country is producing PFOS, which might not be the case because we have an indication that very small amount of countries in the world are producing PFOS, and they are also phasing it out. Then, if you are not producing, but you have industry using these chemicals, you have to check. The third part, or the third thing that you need to really investigate is the product and articles. As mentioned before, for example, the firefighting foams are defined as an acceptable purpose for the convention, and firefighting foams are included in articles. So you have to have a look to them. Professional users as well, as we indicated before, and waste, stockpiles, and contaminated sites are also things that you need to investigate in your inventory. Sometimes when the conference of the parties make decisions, the information that they have might not be complete, and this chemical was listed with a caveat, and that is that if anybody identifies any other sector that might be of importance, they should notify it immediately. What we already have at this stage was the state of knowledge at the information at the moment of listing these chemicals, but these chemicals, as their properties are very interesting as water repellent and dust repellent, has been used in many things that we might not be aware of, or maybe it has not been used elsewhere. The other thing that it is important that you investigate is your legal framework. Do you have a legal framework to address these chemicals? If not, do you need one? How do you need it? How do you need to establish one that it can be implementable? So just to have a look a little about the acceptable purposes and the specific exemptions, here in this slide you have the list of those that were listed in the Annex B of the Stockholm Convention. And for example, firefighting foams. Firefighting foams probably is the biggest stockpiles that you have, and this might be in refineries, in airports, military uses, or in hospitals, or in those places that government might be controlling that have an extensive use of firefighting foams. This, as an acceptable purpose, can still be used, but the last conference of the parties recommended to stop using PFOS in this use, in particular because alternatives are available. So you really don't need to keep on using it if you have alternatives. But according to the convention, you are able to keep on having PFOS here. Aviation hydraulic fluids. This one mostly you might find in airports. If you have systems to change the fluids and to make the plane's maintenance at home. This is a use that also alternatives are available, and that the Conference of the Parties recommended to try to stop using PFOS here. Metal plating. In the case of metal plating, in many countries, PFOS is still being used in metal plating, and some of those countries have requested for the acceptable purpose exemption or the notification. So if you have plating industry, please check if you're still using PFOS. Photo imaging and photoresist and anti-reflective are very small uses. If you don't have the industry there, you might not need to go into an in-depth inventory. Synthetic carpets, today the new carpets probably don't have PFOS, but other PFCs. But synthetic carpets in use might still have PFOS. So the problem here is not the carpets you are having in use, but when you need to do your waste management. That could be a problem. So it might be interesting for the inventories, but of course you are not going to make an inventory of all the synthetic carpets you have in your country. This is just an idea of the potential things that you have. And there is a questionnaire also related to how to address this thing, and it doesn't, so it does not become a real burden for you. Leather, apparel, textiles, paper, and packaging. Today, most probably other chemicals are being used. The same case as in the synthetic carpets, but due to the main phase out of PFOS, you might also have issues related to waste with this. At this point, we don't have a lot of information about it, but these are the things that are interesting to have a look very quickly. For example, if you think about packaging, we used to have a slide that had a pizza and its package. So the idea was not the pizza containing PFOS, but the package itself. So sometimes if you are establishing legislation, for example, packaging could be one of your targets, for example. So data managing and evaluation. The guidance includes some ideas and concepts about how to do the data management, some templates and examples, and also it provides a mechanism for evaluating the inventory, where gaps and limitations can be identified, if the obligations are being met, if you need to notify and register for acceptable purposes and specific exemptions. And here I will make a little pause, because as you know, the specific exemptions have a deadline of 5 years. These chemicals were listed in 2009. They entered into force in 2010. So it means that by August 2015, which is next year, 1 year and 2 months from now, the specific exemptions will expire, unless the Conference of the Parties decides otherwise. And the Conference of the Parties is taking place May 2015. For having an extension of specific exemptions, parties need to indicate their need to continue using those specific exemptions. So for those of you that have not yet registered for specific exemptions, please note that after August 2015, they might expire. We still don't know what will happen and what new countries will be deciding at COP7, but this is something to really bear in mind. With the acceptable purposes, there is no time limit or time bound at this stage, but as the knowledge comes and as the Conference of the Parties gets more information about the alternatives, some of them might be requested to stop the use. We have to be very conscious of what these uses are and what the situation in the country is, so that when you are negotiating at the Conference of the Parties, you'll have very clear indication on how to really move forward. Managing data, this is just an example on how to quantify the amount of PFOS in one focal area. So for example, you see that the square in blue, it has a formula there where the T represents the total quantity of PFOS used in an industrial process per year. And the way to calculate it is to use the PFOS concentration or a percentage of the PFOS, for example, in the textile formula. And the C is how much you have consumed. the consumption you have had during that year. So by multiplying those two things, you'll have the total amount. And this is a very simple method of doing it. What you have to make an inventory of is the consumption you have of your yearly consumption, the percentages that that you need to use in this formula are part of tables. I will show the tables later. Step 5 goes into the preparation of the inventory report. And as I was saying sometime before, there are some things or some elements that we consider essential. And these are the ones that you see here in the slide: objectives and scope, the data methodology you used. And this is also something very important because if you have done, for example, dioxins and furans inventories or PCBs inventories, you might have made several decisions and several estimations. So if you just don't explain in the inventory report how or which type of assumptions you made, then somebody that looks at the inventory report will not have an idea of the accuracy of that data, for example. I always give a very general example here. If you are talking, for example, of dioxins and furans, and you're talking of open burning, for example, you might, to really get a good number, you need to have a very good idea of the open burning that you had. If you don't have that and you are only doing an estimation, you have to include that in your inventory report. In the case of PFOS, that's essential as well. If you are not going in depth into one of the sectors because you don't have information, for example, aviation hydraulic fluids, you went to the different airports, you went to the different facilities, and you didn't get the information because they didn't know. So going in depth might not be the good methodology or strategy at this stage. So you might need to include in your inventory that when you were compiling this data, you didn't get information. So what you have there is a very big number that might not be representing the sector. And that is how the description of the data methodology should also go. So the limitations that are mentioned afterwards are really identified and very clearly stated. Final results, of course, you always need to give numbers, but you also need to give the numbers in a format that is useful for the future, that it is useful for those that are making priorities, and that it is useful for the reporting, for example. So have a look at the different potential uses of your inventory when you are providing the final results. This guidance was prepared and developed, taking into consideration these different things. So the format of these final results, how to present them, is completely compatible with the reporting under Article 15, that the deadline I was saying is this 31st of August. Gaps, analysis, and limitations are very important to really have an idea of the completion of the inventory, but gaps and limitations might not be bad news. They might be very good news for making project proposals, for asking and requesting for things that you need to go in depth, or to really prioritize and say, okay, this is very hard information, I will not change my action plan because of it. So in this, at this moment, we will not take it into consideration for the action plan. Further actions as well need to be part of the inventory report. Those are that took the picture, really know what was beyond that picture, what was at the left side or at the hand side of that picture. So they might be able to also indicate some recommendations to follow up. Other things, for example, the stakeholder list, those that you consulted with, might be also included. The legislation analysis might also be included as well. Contaminated sites. I like this picture very much, this diagram actually. Usually we tend to think that PFOS contamination occurs at industrial places because of industrial uses, but usually in this case with PFOS and PBDs, there are so many articles that we have at home. For example, the television, the couches, even the walls that have insulation materials, for example, might be sources of PFOS. So this is not to indicate you to go into your homes and just do an inventory there, but it can also be very simple measures to take. For example, people not to use those things to clean furniture that have or might contain PFOS. So some things might also be very simple to do, and that can help to avoid the contamination, not only contamination, contaminated sites creation, but also the contamination. I mentioned before that the guidance provided different tables with concentrations of PFOS in different products. Here is, for example, one that is included in Chapter 4. And you can see that the first column indicates the different products. For example, aviation hydraulic fluids, which is an acceptable purpose. The concentration that has been found. Of course, these are ranges. And the reference from where these percentages were taken is included also in the table so that you can go and have a look at them. Some of them are very similar. Some might have different the ranges that are broad. It depends. But this gives you an indication on where you are. This is also something to include in when you are reporting your inventory data and indicating the type of percentages you use and why did you use that. If you were in a conservative approach, using the highest percentages, so you are addressing all the risks that you might have, or you are having an approach where only the lowest ranges were used because you don't consider PFOS is a big issue in your country because of the different situations. So here is an overview of the different annexes. In this case, the Annex 1 has a glossary of the different poly and perfluorinated compounds. As you know, it's huge, the potential amount of chemicals that contain PFOS and its related chemicals as they were listed. So the idea is to have is to provide a glossary. Also links to the OECD list of PFOS and PFCs is provided in the guidance. The Annex 2 relates to the production and use of PFOS in the different sectors. From Annexes 3 to 11 are the different questionnaires that you might use as a basis for asking questions to your different sectors or your different stakeholders. Annex 12 and 13 relates a little to methods to verify the presence of perfluorinated substances and some methods for analysis and their limitations. Very soon there will also be a guidance on screening these chemicals in products and articles available on the website of the Stockholm Convention, so you might also wish to have a look at it and see if it can be used for this inventory part or afterwards. This is an example of questionnaire for synthetic carpets, and you can see that you have, it's very simple, it's a tick type of questionnaire that gives indications. For PFOS, natural carpets are not to be considered, but synthetic carpets. So if you have that business that's being done at country level have synthetic carpets, that might be something that calls your attention. At this stage, I'll thank you for your attention. If you wish more information, you can always send us an email, but now I will pass the floor to Dan, who will indicate about the questions and answers part.